Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I'm joining Kathy, Ronnie Sue, and Sonia for a Punched Out Thursday to Die For. You can find links to their channels in the description box. I hope you'll check out their videos as well. In A Punched Out Thursday to Die For, we use our dies and punches to create scrapbook pages, and it's rare that I don't use punches on almost any scrapbook page, but certainly for A Punched Out Thursday to Die For, I usually use quite a few punches, but for this layout, I'm just going to use some dies that I had in my stash. I'm starting off with a piece of smooth white 120-pound cardstock that I've coated with some Liquitex gesso. I'm using a Prima stencil and some Liquitex modeling paste to add some texture to the background of my layout. I'm going to actually add quite a bit of modeling paste on this layout. I am mainly going to have the modeling paste in the two opposite corners. However, I don't get there until the end. In the beginning, I have the modeling paste kind of spread in a number of different places on the layout, and then eventually I will join all of these areas together into two larger areas, but that's a little bit later in the video. In addition to using that Prima stencil, I'm also using this Tim Holtz dot stencil. It has some random dots. Some are very tiny and some are a little bit bigger. And I like the way this looks around the edge of stenciling. I just think that it adds a cool touch, and I like the idea of having more than one stencil on the background. I've been doing that a lot lately, and I think it's fun to combine stencils. Next, I'm going to add some color to my background. I'm going to use a number of different sprays. Before I add any sprays to the background, I mist it with some water, just a light coat, and this helps the sprays to spread around a little bit as soon as I spray them onto the background. When the color spreads out a little bit, I know that it's going to be a little lighter than it's going to look if the color is concentrated in one area, and I usually like to keep my backgrounds on the lighter side. Not super light, but I don't want the background to get too dark most of the time and overpower the photos. To help the color spread a little bit more, I also add some water after I add the sprays to the background, and then I use my heat tool and I dry each layer of color. Next, I'm adding some purple to the background, or at least I think it looks like purple, but the name of the color is Ocean Blue, and that's a Tattered Angels Glimmer Mist. It looks a little bit more like purple to me, although definitely a bluish purple. I add this in a couple of different places on the background. Again, adding lots of water to it to help the color spread out. I was thinking after I added the color, though, that it was going to be a little bit too dark, so I started adding a lot of water to it to dilute it down. I want the background to be a little more subtle, and I don't want there to be one color that's really dark and one color that's super light. So I'm being a little gentler with adding the color now, just adding a little bit and then using some paper towel to remove whatever excess color there is. I always make sure I have a roll of paper towel, or at least a couple of paper towels nearby when I make a mixed media background. I think it's really important because you never know what you're going to have to clean up very quickly. I continue to add the purplish color to the background, although I have to say that once I dilute the color, it does look a lot more blue than it looked when I first put it on the layout. You can see in the lower left-hand corner, I think that looks very purple. So I decided that I wanted to go in a little bit more of a blue direction. So I grabbed another Tattered Angels Glimmer Mist called Blue Bell. I think that this blue also looks a little bit purple, a little on the purple side, but it's definitely more of a blue, and I like this color a little bit better. So now I'm spraying that on the background. I'm using my paper towel and some water to remove some of the color. I don't often spray right on my layouts. Sometimes I do, but I usually use the packaging technique, which allows you to control the color a little bit better than spraying it on the background. So if there's gesso on the background, often it's very easy to remove that overspray and just clean it up a little bit with some water and paper towel. Something that I noticed about this layout is I started off with a relatively clean table, and then as the mixed media progresses, my table gets messier and messier and messier. I don't usually stop at this point to clean up, so you'll see an accumulation of paper towels and supplies that I used and some color and other mixed media on my desk. You can see that the color is coming up pretty well just by spraying water and using a paper towel. Later on, I added a little bit more gesso to the background. I just wanted some of the areas to be even more white. I didn't mention it earlier, but I should let you know that the yellow spray that I'm using is a Tim Holtz Distress Mica Stain. The name of the color is Flickering Candle. I believe that that color may have been from one of the Tim Holtz Mica Stain Halloween packs that I love to pick up. I love Halloween. Whenever Tim Holtz has some mixed media to go along with Halloween, I always try to pick it up if it's available. Sometimes they sell out too quickly for me to get my hands on them. I use a little bit more modeling paste on the bottom because I wanted to join the larger area of color that's on the left with that smaller area that's on the right. After I added some modeling paste between those two areas, I started thinking that I wanted to see what the stenciling would look like if I went back in and added some white over the top. So I'm trying to line up the stencil the best I can with the patterns that are already down. I'm adding just a few touches of white to the stenciled area, and I really like the way that looked. So I continue doing that in a couple of different areas. I have to say that my stencil got a little clogged with the modeling paste at one point, so I did have to stop using it and go and rinse it off. Then I was able to start using it again so that the modeling paste would end up actually on the layout and not just on my stencil. Since I liked the way the white modeling paste looked on top of the colors, I thought I would add a little bit more white. This time I wanted it to look a little less structured, so I took my palette knife and I dipped it in the modeling paste and I just scraped it on a couple of different areas, and I thought that that looked pretty cool too. It looked a little different than when I added it through the stencil, but it added, I thought, another cool effect to the layout. The palette knife looks a little bit rough and irregular, and I like that touch as well. Earlier, when I sprayed the yellow spray, I got some on the right-hand side of the layout, so I cleaned that up a little bit. Now I'm going back in again with my stencil. What I'm doing here is I'm extending some of those areas. I decided that I was going to join all the areas on the top and all the areas on the bottom using the stenciling. Then I was going to add some sprays to make the areas of color in the upper right-hand corner and the lower left-hand corner. I don't like to cut out big portions of the mixed media part of the process video because I know how much I like to see exactly how a scrapbooker makes a background, especially when it's a technique I'm not familiar with. But in this case, I'm going to cut out some of the footage because I extend the area where there's modeling paste and then I add sprays in the exact same way that I did that initially on the layout. I'm just making the areas larger. Now you can see that I have my two large areas of color. I have dried the entire layout. Once it was thoroughly dry, I ran it through my laminator. I'm not sure if you're supposed to put modeling paste through a laminator, but I do it every now and then when I'm sure that everything is dry because I have had some disasters with backgrounds that weren't dry. And now I want to add some highlights. So I use some Deco Art Metallic Luster, which is a wax metallic finish. I'm using Champagne Ice. That was the first color I used. That has a little bit of a gold tinge to it. Now I'm using some White Frost. This just helps to highlight the raised areas a little bit. The effect is much more dramatic when you have a darker color, but I still like the little subtle touch of highlighting a few areas. I think that all of these different touches kind of combine to make the background a little bit more interesting. Now I'm adding one of my favorite things, which is white splatters. I'm using my scissors and I'm tapping them against the part of the container that holds the little straw. That makes smaller splatters. I didn't want there to be big, huge splatters on this layout, so I control the splatters in that way. I find that if I just take my finger and tap it against the straw, the splatters are bigger. I Can't really explain the physics of that to you, but I've done it enough times to know that that's definitely one way that you can control the size of the splatters. I do tend to add a lot of white splatters to my layouts. Usually they're not super noticeable, but they do add a nice little touch. So I continue adding a couple of rounds of them. You may have noticed that that center area isn't as white as it was before, and I don't need it to be stark white, but I did want it to look a little cleaner and fresher. So I'm using a sponge that I've had since, I can't even tell you, maybe college, maybe before. I'm using some Liquitex gesso. I'm just dabbing it on the background. This not only helps to make that center area look a little bit whiter, it also fades the edges on the purple and blue and yellow color so that they fade nicely into the white area without having harsh lines. I wanted to add some stamping to the background. The stamping is going to be very subtle. I'm not adding as much stamping as I normally do. And instead of using black, which again, I generally add black stamping to my layouts, I decided to use a color. I'm using Ranger Archival Ink in Majestic Violet. I chose that color because I wanted there to be a little bit of a true purple or violet in the background. My photos have some purple flowers in them, and I thought that would help to tie everything together on the layout. So I use a couple of different stamps. I use a dot stamp. Those dots are small, but not super, super small. I'm not sure of the manufacturer of that one. I also add some script stamping. That was a Tim Holtz clear stamp. Then I use a Stampin' Up stamp to make some really, really tiny dots. They're almost like little specks. Now I'm going to start working on my photos. I have two circle photos. They are both of flowers. One is a slightly larger circle than the other. I have both photos mounted on some white cardstock, and then I used two dies from my stash. I believe both of those dies are from the In Love art shop. I'm not 100% sure about the one in the upper right-hand corner, but I am pretty certain about the one in the lower left-hand corner. I love the way Sizzix engraves the word Sizzix in their dies so I know where they came from. I have a lot of dies that I either didn't save the packaging for, or in some cases there was no packaging, and I really can't remember where a lot of those dies came from. I attached those die cut circles down to the back of the photos with the decorative edges showing all around. I popped both photos up on some foam, and now I'm using some Prima Say It with Pearls flourishes. I absolutely love these. They are not easy to find, and I snatch them up whenever I see them because they just add so much to a page, I think. I had two of the exact same pearl flourishes. I cut both of them not exactly in half. I have one longer piece, and that is the piece that's going along the top and the bottom of the layout. And then I attach the smaller piece on the sides of the layout, and this creates kind of an L shape of pearls around each of the photos. They stuck to the layout perfectly. I didn't have to add any additional adhesive. And I think that they're very subtle because they are pearl colored and there's a lot of white in the background, but I absolutely love them. I love the texture that they add. I struggled for a little bit. I wasn't sure what else to add to this layout. And then I thought, well, of course you have to add some leaves. That's something that you add to most of your layouts. After I thought for a while, I was thinking that I should probably use leaves or branches with dimension, and I thought of these chipboard pieces that I bought from Little Birdie quite a while ago now, and I haven't used them. I used 3 packs on this layout. I embossed them with some Ranger Line Tinsel embossing powder. Then I used some heavy matte gel medium, and I attached them down to the page, and I also used the gel medium to attach some flowers I had in my stash down to the page. Then I was thinking that I could add a couple of flowers to the branches. I didn't have too many of the same flowers, so I just used what I had. To add the title, which I'm going to call Traces of You, I'm using some Bo Bunny Bee-utiful thickers. The reason that this is called Traces of You is because my parents planted these flowers, I would say 30 or more years ago. They still show up every year. I've told my kids about them, and we're always on the lookout for them. They bloom for a couple of days, and then we don't see them again till the next year, but they do return every year, and they remind me of my parents. I added some strips of self-adhesive Paper Studio pearls around the edge of both of the photos. I used some white berry branch die cuts from a company called Sentimentally Yours, and I added a couple of those around the layout. I wanted to add at least one more item I made from dies. I added a little bit more stamping using another very tiny dot stamp. That one is from Holtz. I used some gel glue and I glued down all of those die cuts to the layout. The very last touch is this yellow bow that I glue on top of the photo on the top of the page. The layout is complete, and here are some close-ups. Thank you so much, not only for watching this video, but for sticking with me until the very end. This layout took me quite a while to make, especially the background, so I had a lot of footage, and I had to make some decisions about what to include and what to edit out. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and once again, thank you for watching. Please don't forget to check out Ronnie Sue, Sonia, and Kathy's videos. Again, the links to their channels are in the description box. Please feel free to leave me a comment. I love reading your comments. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.